All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this December 1st Committee as a Whole meeting for Finance Administrative. Mrs. Coakley, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Nation,
Here.
Mr. Green, Mrs. Heinz, Mr. Derman, Mr. Loop, Mr. Harrell, Mrs. Moore, Mr. Winkler, Mrs. Baker, Mr. Bittencourt, Mrs. Lamy, Mr. Hersey, Mr. Breaux, Mr. Kuzan, Mrs. Page.
As the invocation and pledge were said at our first committee meeting tonight, they'll be dispensed with here. Are there any visitors that committee members would like to recognize? All right, not seeing any, we'll move on to the approval of minutes for the committee as a whole meeting held on November 3rd, 2022. Do I have a motion to approve? Motion by Mrs. Baker, second by Mr. Green. Any comments from the public? Any comments from committee members? All right, the floor is open to vote.
Y'all can just tell me yay. Yay. Them two on the end down there, they're having computer problems.
You working on it?
He voted, you didn't.
Wait, I didn't vote?
No, Lisa. You know.
All right, and as suspected, the vote is unanimous. All right, moving on to our administrative update, Mr. Kosei.
All right, Chairman Nation, thank you, President Harrell, Board, and Superintendent Javia. Tonight, I bring you an update on the Edgelog GPS upgrade within our Transportation Department. Information Technology staff members have installed GPS units on a total of 81 buses to date, whereas we have about 348 more to completion. IT will continue to install more each day. On the schedule, we plan on getting about 12 tomorrow. The Edgelog software has been upgraded, and the company is working with IT to properly configure the parent portal. IT will verify the bus data is being transferred correctly within the parent portal, and we will begin notifying parents on how to download and access the application. Just for your reference, it takes about 15 minutes only for them to install a GPS unit once they're able to get to the bus. And this is the first phase of putting the GPS segment of the program on the buses. We're still going to be looking for, and we're awaiting tablets and readers to arrive at this point in time. And if you have any questions, one of the smartest men in the room, Chief Bouillon, will be here to answer any questions regarding this information.
Any questions for Mr. Kosei or Mr. Bouillon? Okay, not seeing any.
Next up is item B, which is our monthly maintenance and custodial report. And Mr. Brad Taylor, our Assistant Supervisor of Maintenance, is here to answer any questions regarding that report.
All right, any questions for the maintenance and custodial report? All right, not seeing any. Moving on, item C.
Item C, your monthly risk management report is before you in board docs, and Mr. Alfonso or I will attempt to answer any questions you have regarding that report.
Any questions regarding the risk management report? Okay, not seeing any. Moving on to item D, Mr. Kosei.
And finally, with administrative, our monthly transportation report is before you, and Dr. Grant Gerald is here to answer any questions with that report.
Any questions for Dr. Gerald? Okay, not seeing any. That concludes your reports for tonight.
This has been a good night. Thank you.
Thank you,
Chairman
Mr.
Nation.
Kosei. Construction, Ms. Tipton.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Nation. Several of these items that are coming up, I just want to tell you, are in anticipation of completion of projects. We see that in the near future here before the end of the year or first part of this coming year. So our first item is recommends acceptance of additions to Bayou Woods Elementary School as substantially complete, subject to architect's recommendations, submission of all regulatory requirements, and approval of Superintendent Javia, St. Tammany Parish School Board Project number 1910.
All right. Motion by Mrs. Lamy. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Kuzan. Any comments or questions by the public for Ms. Tipton or regarding the, all right, any comments or questions by committee members? All right, not seeing any, the floor is open to vote. And that motion is adopted unanimously. All right, item B.
Recommends acceptance of additions to Covington Elementary School as substantially complete, subject to architect's recommendations, submission of all regulatory requirements, and approval of Superintendent Javia, STPSB project number 1915.
All right, motion by Mr. Derman, a second by Mr. Loop. Any comments or questions from the public? Any comments or questions from committee members? Floor is open to vote. And that motion is adopted unanimously.
Yes,
All right,
sir.
moving on to item C.
We recommend acceptance of the takeover agreement with Merchants National Bonding Company for 7 high schools' artificial turf field installation as substantially complete, subject to architect's recommendations, submission of all regulatory requirements, and approval of Superintendent Javia, St. Tammany Parish School Board Project P0265.
All right, motion by Mr. Green, second by Mrs. Moore. Is any comments or questions from the public? Any comments or questions from committee members? Mr. Derman and then Mr. Green. And then we'll open up
Ms.
the queue.
Tipton, just curious, out of the cost of the fields, was it fully covered underneath the bond that we had in place?
Yes, sir. The bond covered that and paid the difference between that and the new bids that came into the bonding company.
So even there was an overage because of the time delays and the cost increase, basically?
Well, the difference in what the new bidders
Price
presented
was?
to, price-wise, for the work to be done.
So it was fully covered underneath the bond, though?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say the fields look great, and thank goodness that is all over.
Thank you, Mrs. Moore.
I want to reiterate on that. You know, I've attended some of the games at some of those fields. I know some of the public thought we were spending money, but this is such a plus for our school system and the safety for the kids. They're multiple use now, so thank you for all your hard work. It looks
Thank
great.
you. Yes, ma'am.
And well said, Mrs. Moore. I couldn't agree. I was just reiterating a third time that, you know, I've been to 2 of those fields and they're absolutely gorgeous. And I've seen pictures of the others. And I mean, what pride for these schools to have such gorgeous first-class fields. You know, it's well worth the money that was spent. Thank you. All right, the floor is open to vote. And the vote is unanimous. Moving on to item E.
D, I think. We're recommending acceptance of the tender agreement, slightly different, with Merchants National Bonding Company and Precision Construction and Contracting LLC for 7 high schools' artificial turf field installation as substantially complete, subject to the architect's recommendations, submission of all regulatory requirements, and approval of Superintendent Javia, and that is part of STPSB project number P0265 also.
All right, motion by Mrs. Moore, second by Mr. Harold. Any comments or questions from the public? Any comments or questions from committee members? Not seeing any, the floor is open to vote. And that vote is unanimous. Item
The last part of the turf field recommends acceptance of civil site work for 3 artificial turf fields as substantially complete, subject to the architect's recommendations, submission of all regulatory requirements, and approval of Superintendent Javia, STPSB project number P0265.
And do I have a motion? Mr. Hersey, is there a second? Mrs. Lamey? Any comments or questions from the public? Any comments or questions from committee members? Not seeing any, the floor is open to vote. And that vote is unanimous.
Our next item is recommending authorization for Superintendent Jabbia and/or Board President Harold to purchase land situated in Section 30, Township 6, 6 South, Range 11 East, St. Tammany Parish, Louisiana, being 4.854 acres located on the north side of North Stadium Drive, adjacent to Covington High School.
All right, is there a motion? Mr. Luke, is there a second? Second by Mr. Derman. Any comments or questions from the public? Any comments or questions from committee members? Mrs. Moore.
What was offered is, and accepted, is $278,240. And that is less than the appraisal.
Mrs. Moore, are you finished?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Yes,
I am.
Mrs. Green, Mr. Green.
I was just curious, what's the expected use for the property?
So this piece of property, if you're familiar with Covington High, in the same width as Covington High, extending back to the north, to North Stadium Drive, this is just across the street, and connects Covington High with another piece of property that the school board obtained when it was actually donated to us. So this will create contiguous land owning for the school board. There is some hope also to maybe put some parking there to help with some of the overflow during all the athletic events too.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Anyone else? All right, the floor is open to vote. And that vote is unanimous. All right, item G.
Our construction report update, our full report is on board docs, but just quickly, our large capital improvement projects are progressing. The weather is still cooperating for us for the most part. Some recent highlights, the first slab pour for the classroom building for Fontainebleau High School additions is scheduled for tomorrow. The work to establish permanent power for the new addition at Abita Middle occurred over Thanksgiving week. Also during Thanksgiving week, all of the precast structural slab panels were delivered and installed at Abney Elementary for their additions. The turf installation is progressing at Salmon High School. And we are, fingers crossed, elevator shipment for St. Tammany Junior was supposed to happen sometime this week. So we will have, hopefully, that elevator very soon. And we'll be glad to answer any questions.
All right, any questions for Ms. Tipton regarding construction? All right, thank you, Ms. Tipton.
Thank you.
Moving on to our internal auditor reports, Mr. Incaprera. Any questions the report was provided to you in board docs. Any questions for Mr. Incaprera tonight? All right, not seeing any, we'll move on to our finance reports. Mrs. Prevost.
Thank you, Mr. Nation. Good evening. I'll give you a quick financial update on some financial projects that are ongoing. I had provided you with the first budget update for the year by memo. It's as of November 30th. As of November 30th, actual total revenues and expenditures are within 5% of budgeted revenues and expenditures, so no revision is necessary at this time. For the revenues, the state public equalization funds, or MFP funds, received to date are in line with the budget. Once February 1st student counts are complete, the state will adjust the MFP either up or down depending on those counts, and we'll receive that increase or decrease in April of 2023. Sales tax revenues are exceeding the current budget projection by approximately $3.5 million. That is as of November 30th. We'll continue to monitor those. Ad valorem tax revenues, we received the final tax roll in November, and it's in line with what I budgeted for ad valorem taxes. Actual expenditures are in line, less than 1% within the budget projection, so no budget revisions is necessary for those expenditures. Our annual audit is ongoing by our external auditors, Laporte CPAs. They are wrapping up the audit, and we have prepared and provided them with our annual financial statements for fiscal 2022. The audit financial statements are due to legislative auditor by December 31st, and we're on track to meet that deadline. The audit report will be made available to the public in January, and Laporte will be presenting the results of our annual audit at the February committee as a whole meeting. Just to update you on school bus purchases, the purchase orders for the 100 school buses was completed today. The bid was awarded to Kent Mitchell. All 100 school buses were purchased with the elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds, or ESSER funds. That was funds provided by the federal government due to the COVID pandemic. Estimated delivery of the 100 buses is November 2023, with a total cost of $11.4 million. An update on the stipends. All eligible employees have received all of the stipends as outlined in the salary schedule for fiscal 2023. 1,582 certificated employees received the targeted school stipend of $500 for a total of $791,000 gross. 2,665 certificated employees received the effectiveness stipend of $1,000 for a total of $2.7 million. 642 certificated employees received the critical shortage subject stipends of $500 for a total of $320,750. And finally, 5,325 certificated and support employees received the employee salary reserve stipend of $1428.06 for a total of $7.6 million before benefits. That concludes my financial update, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Prevost. Any questions for Mrs. Prevost? Mr. Winkler?
Ms. Prevost, I don't know if you would answer this, or Mr. Kosei. We got 100 buses. We already got some buses that we're going to get. How are we going to handle the maintenance? We have a plan for that?
Well, we've met with Mr. Derman and a few other notable gentlemen on this, and we're working on a possible site and a maintenance situation to handle these buses. It's going to be, I guess, basically a small scale at first, and seeing if that's working and we can possibly expand on that. And Ms. Cameron Tipton has been involved in these meetings with us as well.
I figured you'd be ahead of that. Just want to know.
All right, thank you, Mr. Winkler. Anyone else? Okay, move on to item B.
Okay, I provided you with the projected budget for the Students with Exceptionalities, or SWE, camera fund for your approval. This fund was set up to account for state funding received in October to provide for the purchase and installation of cameras in certain special education classrooms per Louisiana Revised Statute 17948. This fund is considered a special revenue fund, and as required by law, a budget must be presented for this fund. The state funding listed of $670,157 is the allocation for cameras that was given to the district by the state. We have projected expenditures for purchase and installation of cameras at $600,000. This is a high projection, as we are uncertain at this time how much of the state allocation will be spent this year. Any funds remaining will be carried over to next year as fund balance and can be spent in future years. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have on the budget.
Is there a motion to accept, a motion by Mr. Brode and a second by Mrs. Lamey? Any comments or questions from the public? Yes, ma'am.
So just looking at this, Kathleen Canino from Covington, it says the original budget and then the difference, and the difference is, that column is pretty much the same as the original, or it is the same. Is that a difference, or is that just what carried over to the same cost?
Mrs. Prevost?
Yeah, it's gonna be the same because there was no prior year budget. That's,
Okay.
the difference is always the prior year to the current year, and there is none, so.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And then how many cameras did the $600,000, how many was that able to purchase?
That would be about 150.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, not seeing any other members of the public with questions. Any members of the committee that have questions? Mr. Derman? Let's queue up, because,
Just curious, does this cover the installation of the cameras, the cost of installation, as well as the camera itself?
Lewis answered that one.
Okay.
The funds would cover the sign, the installation, the cabling installation, and the camera itself.
What about
Not the
storage?
Not the storage.
Okay, so the storage of the video, audio, whatever that's retaining as a separate
That's-
cost, and that's
That's on us.
on us. And roughly what would that cost be? Do you have any idea yet?
We're including it with our other security cameras at this point, so until we see how many camera requests we're gonna receive, we don't wanna purchase additional storage. We can absorb it into our traditional security cameras.
And how long do we have to store each
30
video?
days.
30 days, so it's a revolving 30 days, so,
It'll overwrite itself if it's not extracted within that 30 days.
okay, so, but we have to store it up to that 30 days and whatever cameras that we have, and that's a charge or cost to the system itself.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
thank you, Mr. Derman. Mrs. Lamy?
We have the applications live now, correct? And have we received, do you know a number of how many we've received thus far since they went active?
3.
3. And are we considering budgeting something for someone to redact these videos? Or is that going to be someone who's already employed and we're just going to plop it on them too?
That's not covered as part of the funds that were allocated to us from the state.
So
That's-
we can't use some of the funds for that if we chose to? It's only for the actual material? Okay. And 150, how many classes do we have at each school? About? Just depends, every school's different?
It's,
So like it could be anywhere from the self-contained I'm talking about. It's only self-contained suite,
It-
so we're not talking about all classrooms.
the
But maybe
way
like
the-
3 to 4?
I'll work backwards. The way the funding worked is we provided the state with the total number of self-contained classrooms, and they provided the
Got it.
funds. So
Thank you. That's what I wanted to know.
this is to cover all of the classrooms.
If we need to. That's what I wanted to know. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Lamy. Mrs. Baker?
So with the leftover, the 71,000's left over, right? So that can only be used for those 3 things, the camera, the wiring, and the signs? And we can't, well, why do we have leftover if we can't use it to get the personnel to redact it?
Well, we're projecting, so would be 150 cameras before year end, unlikely. Like they said, there's only 3 requests at the moment.
Okay.
So I always go high, because you don't want to be short. So most likely it will be much lower than that and a larger balance of carryover. I'll do a final budget at the end.
So carryover meaning next year
To
we
next
can
year,
buy more
in future
cameras?
years,
But
until
this
it's
is-
gone.
Until it's gone. That's what I
Right.
wanted to know. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Baker. Mr. Green?
And when it's gone, it essentially becomes an unfunded mandate. We're not going to get more funds.
Nobody knows.
Who
I guess,
knows?
But yeah.
But when the 670,000 is gone, do we still have to have a separate budget for it?
No, that, I just accounted for that separately so we could account for it.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Green. All right, not seeing anyone else in the queue, the floor is open to vote. Mr. Hersey, we need you to vote. And that motion is adopted unanimously. All right, moving on to item C.
The October financial report was provided to you, and I'll answer any questions you may have.
Any question about the October financials? All right, item D.
The purchasing report was provided to you, and Ms. Carrasco is here to answer any questions on that report.
Any questions for Mrs. Carrasco? All right, not seeing any. That concludes your report. Thank you,
Thank
Mrs.
you.
Prevost. Any members of the administrative staff that would like to leave, we will give you the opportunity to do that now.
Not you, Mr. Leonard.
All right. Thank you all for your hanging in there tonight. All right. All right. Mr. Kosei, are we ready to? All right, ready to go. So Mr. Kosei is our timekeeper tonight. So first up is Mr. Al Aday.
Good evening again, board members and everybody that's left. I would like to take this minute just to kind of step back from the norms and just hope that everybody had a great Thanksgiving, everybody that's here, everybody that's employed by the system. I'd also like to take the moment to wish everybody a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And I hope that y'all all have a great one. I know I'm planning that for my family, so hopefully y'all have that as well. Remember one important thing. I know we're all going to be traveling, seeing different families. Be careful, be safe, make it here next year. Y'all take care. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Aday, and Merry Christmas to you and to your family. Up next is Mr. Osborne.
Good evening again, board members. I did want to express my appreciation of Human Resources and everybody that's had input in this thing and trying to become more efficient as far as these subs and just the concern and dedication over time to fixing this problem. No one solution is going to fix it, but I think the things I heard in the previous meeting are going to definitely help. And I think the administrator is going to be very thankful once they get rid of those last applications. I really appreciated the segment talking about the scores and the unfairness of the system and the way the goalposts are constantly moved. Superintendent Javi and I both mentioned we did score a victory against Bessie in stopping that plan from moving forward. And we're just two voices, and he has an association, and I have a larger state union, and a lot of voices contributed to say this is just not fair. There were some nice things about it as far as, increasing career technical, but just doubling down on high-stakes testing and continuing to move things forward in the wrong direction is not what our children needed. I started one of my speeches with, the agenda item says accountability. Who's going to hold the Bessie board accountable for 20 years of failed reforms? And they didn't care for that. But so I just, as contentious as things can be, it's all part of a greater purpose in making St. Tammany better. In 1 year, I would like to see one of the departing board members run for Bessie. I think anybody up here could do better than that attorney from Metairie. I promise you that. There's going to be a lot of money, dark money. There is an agenda to destroy public schools. And again, if we can get somebody from St. Tammany, I really think it would help us in that regard. I wanted to thank the board also for keeping this going, and I'm sure Mr. Green sometimes catches heat for making that motion to preserve this part of the agenda. I think only one other district does this. And as messy as the First Amendment can be and democracy can be, employee voices matter, and they help move forward, and they provide hope. And not everybody can make it down here. So sometimes people like Barbara or Carrie or Al, they speak for many, and it's cathartic, and I think that's healthy. And sometimes good ideas. I mean, most of the ideas we forward, we got from the employees. I mean, we're not geniuses, but we just listen to them. And I appreciate this space, and I do wish everyone a Merry Christmas now that it's December 1st. Thank you.
Thank you. Lee Berrios.
So I first have to correct a commonly misworded or misunderstood impression that curriculum is forced on districts. It is not. It's against the law for either the state or the federal government
to force, to dictate curriculum. You have choices. At some point, this board and other boards in the state, and I don't know which ones, I haven't kept up with which ones also try to buy into this tier 1, tier 2 curriculum thing, these pop-up curriculums. But it's, you all have to hold yourselves accountable for what happens in this district. And using a bad curriculum that is supposedly aligned to a test that nobody gets to see is just absurd. And making it worse, now you're requiring teachers to follow those curriculums very, very closely, and they don't like that. So good certified teachers, the ones we have left, are not able to do what they know how to do best, and that's teach kids critical thinking skills and how to think. Before 2010, that's exactly what St. Tammany did. Teachers wrote their own curriculum. There was no curriculum when I first started teaching here. We had real textbooks, which we used as a resource, and we created our own. We looked at the standards. Okay, this is what we're supposed to be doing this year and the next year, and that's what we did. And then St. Tammany had teachers get together and write a formal curriculum for St. Tammany. And it was very good, and it continued to progress. You all have the ability to go back to that. And if there's any discount in the Tier 1 curriculum that you all benefit from, the fact that you have to buy new curriculum every other year just blows that out of the water. So I really hope that this new school board looks, I hope they have to understand what's going on here. And I really hope that they look at doing that, and you won't lose so many teachers, and students will once again begin to learn. We have parents who have had kids over the last 10 or 15 years who have come up and they said, my older students got an excellent education. They're not, my younger children are not getting that anymore. The force zero thing, that really needs to go to court, and I think it's up to superintendents to get together and do that. That was written into the ESSA plan by former State Superintendent John White, because he knew that parents have the right to opt out of the test. The same with the ACT test. It's their right to do that. So he said, fine, but you're going to get, the schools are going to get zeros for that in the teacher evaluation. That accountability system needs to totally be wiped out. Thank you.
Barbara Sharp.
Barbara Shaw, bus driver. I want to thank Mr. Durman for his persistence in questioning the lack of compensation for coverage for bus drivers. Also, thanks to Mr. Brand Osborne for his continuous push for the compensation. An MOU is finally being completed, but the timing is indicative of the lack of the administration's recognition of the crisis that's in transportation. From day one of school this year, driver shortage has been critical. The understated numbers at the beginning of the year was the icing, and nothing has changed except the continuous departure of drivers either by retiring or resigning. The smoke and mirrors game of cover-up, misinformation, and denial the administration is playing is detrimental to the system, and recognition of the problem and taking responsibility for the implementation of more aggressive solutions and plans for the remainder of the year and following years should be at the top of the human resources to-do list. Lack of employees in all critical areas, as well as shoring up the retention of the existing staff, is critical to the education of children. It is time for the board to take the reins that were given them by the public. Do your job.
And last is Kathleen Canino, and she's going to, Mrs. Canino is passing. So that concludes public comments for tonight. Announcements by the board president.
Thank you, Chairman Nation. There will be a Christmas reception featuring Slidell High School at 5:30 p.m. prior to the board meeting on Thursday, December 8th. The board meeting will follow the reception at 6 p.m. That's all I have. Thank you.
And with no further business to come before the committee, I declare this meeting adjourned.